This video today is going to focus on public health issues, contaminated sediments, fish health and safety, and contaminated sites related to White Lake. The video is being done for the White Lake Public Advisory Council. My name is Tanya Kabala, and we have two experts here to talk about these issues and answer frequently asked questions about these issues. And maybe we should start by introducing ourselves.
My name is Dr. Richard Radisky, and I'm a professor of water resources at the Annis Water Resources Institute in Muskegon.
I'm Adam Rosema. I work for the health department. I'm an environmental quality sanitarian.
And, Rick, can you tell us a little bit more about your background related to White Lake and why you'll be able to answer some of our questions?
Sure. I started studying White Lake in 1996, and we did the initial sediment assessment involving the tannery and also Occidental. And then after that we did a follow-up assessment in 2000, and since 2000 I've been studying the benthic invertebrates, the organisms that live on the bottom of the lake, their recovery, and I've also been studying eutrophication, the nutrients, and fish contamination. So I've been doing a variety of studies on the lake. And
Adam, do you want to talk a little bit about your background related to answering these questions?
For the past 13 years, I've worked for the health department, mainly doing residential well and septic inspections. Along with that, we look at groundwater and the hydrology of what's going on in the area. So I'm well aware of just the contaminants, as far as doing assessments on the local water wells and what's going on with the groundwater.
And are you able to also talk a little bit, as we get into the questions about public health as it relates to White Lake?
With the surface water, yes.
Okay, thank you. Can each one of you give me your own perspective on the health of White Lake? How healthy is it related to, maybe 20 years ago? Is it healthy enough for recreational activities?
Sure. White Lake meets all of the public health standards for body contact, for partial body contact, which is swimming, or which is boating and recreation. Also total body contact for swimming. There's a couple beaches on the lake that meet the health department criteria. And in addition to that, it's a lake that has a very healthy fish population. So it's similar to most lakes in southern Michigan that have an impact from urban activities and agricultural runoff. So it is a little enriched in nutrients, but it's in much better shape than a lot of lakes, and it's very similar to other lakes like Pentwater, which we call drowned river mouth lakes. White Lake and Muskegon and Pentwater are drowned river mouth lakes.
Adam, do you want to add something to that?
I agree with what Rick's saying. You covered a lot of what goes on with my job, interacting with just doing some surface water and groundwater testing with the lake.
Okay. And Rick, can you talk about polluted sediments in White Lake, what the problem was, how it's been addressed, and where we're at now?
Sure. We had two industries that discharged chemicals, one since the before World War II and another one since the 50s. And those chemicals were discharged in primarily two areas, Occidental or Hooker Chemical, then now it's Occidental, but those chemicals were discharged in an outfall location kind of on the northern side of the lake. And they discharged PCBs and pesticide intermediates, and those were concentrated in like about a football-size area. So that was a hot spot of PCBs and other chemicals. The tannery on the southern side of the lake discharged materials into a small bay, and those spread out through the entire lake. So we had two areas of very highly contaminated sediments. Both of those were remediated. Occidental and the tannery both were responsible for taking those sediments out. So with respect to toxic levels of sediments or sediments that might cause impacts to aquatic life, fisheries, those have been taken care of and removed.
Are there contaminated sediments in the lake that can harm public health if people were to wade in White Lake or spend a lot of time in White Lake?
No, I think all of that's been taken out. There's been follow-up studies to document the efficiency of the removal, and I would say just regular contact, wading and swimming, the sediments don't pose any harm.
How do people get exposed to pollution? Whether, maybe start with, pollution in the water. How would people have to interact with the water if it was polluted to have a harmful effect, to get ill or, over time get some type of an illness?
I think we're looking at long-term exposure that, it's like any other lake that would be in the area. There's several different sources. You can get it from, it's like you're saying, you're taking a mouthful of it. There's birds, other, wildlife in the area that, if they happen to be near there. We've had some just in sampling the beaches. The water near the beaches, we'll get geese, stuff like that, and you get elevated fecal coliform levels. And you can get some of that, but it's any lake that's like White Lake, Muskegon Lake, any of the inland lakes too. We've had some problems with that on some of the different inland lakes. So I don't think White Lake would be any different from that when you're looking at just the chance of being exposed to something. As far as the industry, residential stuff, myself, it would take a long time for somebody to be exposed to any lake to get it. And with White Lake and the cleanup that's been going on, from what I've seen from the reports from the different regulatory places that have been going on, it doesn't seem like there's much of a concern to me from what I've seen lately because of the cleanup that's been going on in the lake.
So if people were to, swallow White Lake water, if they were drinking, or their kids were to swallow White Lake water, they might be more at risk of maybe a stomach ache or an intestinal condition if there were, animal droppings or things like that, more than being exposed to a chemical that would provide an instant effect to them.
Right. I would agree with that.
Rick, do you want to say anything about that?
I would agree too. All the levels of chemicals are non-detectable. We can't measure them with very sophisticated instruments. We do find nitrogen and phosphorus nutrients, and I do agree with what Adam said. Any hazard is associated with the impact of wildlife in the lake, nothing from humans.
And we haven't necessarily had reports even of the fecal coliform or anything like that from White Lake, have we?
We've had a few beach closures at Maple Park. It's primarily the geese are using all the weeds, and there's some efforts to do some redesigns of the wildlife habitat to get the wildlife away from the beach, essentially. But there's been really no advisories on White Lake proper.
Oh, okay. Well, and I asked that question because I think some people have sometimes told me they feel like there's still chemicals in the water left over from the discharges from a couple of companies. And would that be the case?
No, I think White Lake physically looks different. It's got a brown color to it, and we call that a dystrophic lake. The reason why it's that way, there's a very large wetland complex. You go on the other side of the highway bridge and you see these majestic wetlands which extend quite far up the lake. When plants decay, they put brown colored chemicals into the water, tannins, things that are in tea like that. And just looking at the lake, some people see the brown color. It looks different. It doesn't look blue like Lake Michigan. They think it's contaminated, but that color in the lake is actually good. It provides a service for Lake Michigan by putting that organic matter into the lake. So the brown color is nothing to fear, and there's no, all the industries have been closed for 20 plus years. The wastewater has been taken out of the lake for, 10 plus years. So there's really nothing to worry about contacting the lake.
What about pollution sites around White Lake? I mean, one of the problems that White Lake has had is, leaks or spills or mishaps or in some instances poor handling of waste at a number of sites around White Lake, including the two that have been mentioned, the tannery and Hooker Chemical Occidental. Can either one of you provide information on how those contaminated sites may affect human health? Who wants to start?
I can. All of the contaminated sites have approved cleanup plans. Some of them are have federal oversight. Some of them have Michigan oversight. So, like Occidental Chemical has a approved cleanup plan. They have a groundwater treatment system. DuPont has an approved cleanup plan under the Resource Recovery Act, and they were operating a groundwater treatment system. I don't think it's in operation now.
It actually cleans up the groundwater
Right.
contamination.
Right. Is it still running? I'm not sure if it is.
It is running.
It's still running. Okay. So they have an active treatment system, and I mentioned Occidental has that. Koch Chemical, Muskegon Chemical, that particular site had severe groundwater contamination, but because of the treatment system and removals on site, that's been addressed. And then White Lake Landfill and Howmet, Alcoa, those all have approved cleanup plans too. So they've been operating for, again, 20 plus years, most of those cases. So anything that's been deemed hazardous to public health has been removed, and they're in the phase where they're trying to clean up the groundwater to drinking water standards or public health standards. So there's really no areas that chemicals can contact humans just from the air or from the water. All that's been taken care of.
Adam, do you want to add to that?
I think you pretty much touched on everything.
And
On
then
that,
just
as far as
one more addition to that, we are, the Public Advisory Council is actually in the process of reviewing all the sites of contamination, or a number of them in which we still have a few questions, just to make sure that we understand what's happening with the contamination and where it's at in the cleanup process, and that'll be finished a little bit later this year. Would people be exposed to polluted air from our industrial heritage? I've occasionally had people worried that, we had companies that put chemical discharges into the air, and those discharges or the chemicals may still be lingering in the air for people to breathe and cause harm. Is there any way that we know yes or no on that?
Well, there's some basic air monitoring that goes on. I'm not sure where the nearest station is, but there's really no reason to be concerned about air quality from the legacy from the industries. All the sites have had to have cleanups of contaminated soil, so there's nothing that could become airborne. And even during the cleanup process, there was pretty extensive monitoring of air quality during that process. So whatever's been discharged in the past has long been, blown away by the prevailing winds. And people are more concerned. Scientists are more concerned about the air blowing over from Chicago than anything that's, generated locally here.
You want to add anything, Adam?
I would just say, just to add what Rick was saying about the air quality, I think the concern would be more with the coal-fired power plants. The one in Muskegon would probably have more of an impact than the historical atmospheric air quality that would be in the White Lake area.
People having to touch the soils or, shower in polluted water. I mean, the idea of exposure, people have to have contact or have some type of a...
Yeah, and I don't want to say there's risk at everything, but I mean there is. But with the amount of control that the regulatory agencies have over the sites, I think it provides a little bit of peace of mind I know when I sampled, just for example, in the past I worked for an environmental consulting company, sampled landfills. They had a lot of groundwater monitoring wells, and they had them staggered all around the outside of the property. So they had some that were shallow depth, some at deep. I mean, just for an example. And it's something where you go and you test on a regular basis. And it's the same thing with when we get into commercial wells. We set up a certain testing period on those, and it's something that I'm sure the state and EPA have set up on those sites too. So whether they've done soil remediation, they think that's went into the groundwater, they would do regular monitoring on the sites. So I think that would be something, if you live next door to it, if the site's in remediation, the local regulatory agency should be following up, whether it's the health department, DEQ, EPA, to look at the site to make sure that it's not going to be a problem, especially with direct exposure to the soil or to anything if there were surface water in the area.
Rick, do you want to add to that?
No, I would agree that all of the sites have had risk assessments where a toxicologist, has to look at human exposure pathways, and they've looked at soil pathway and contaminated water pathways, and there's really no chance of being exposed to those chemicals. They've taken the surface soils and remediated those, and then there's groundwater capture systems, so the plume of contaminated groundwater is not migrating off-site into somebody's drinking water. And then in areas where there is impacts, I know they've extended municipal water out to those. So I think pretty much your contact from soil, your contact from air, and contact from drinking water has been really eliminated as a probability of causing disease or hazardous exposure.
So you would need to have some type of contact with the pollution, either by drinking water that's contaminated,
right,
breathing air that's polluted, maybe showering in polluted water that maybe evaporates.
Or digging into the soil.
Or digging into the soil.
And I think most of the sites are fenced in, so you can't get to them. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the fish in White Lake? Are they safe to eat?
Sure. We just completed a study where we looked at fish in White Lake, and then we compared them to fish from Pentwater Lake. Pentwater Lake does not have the industrial legacy as White Lake, and we sampled in 2005 and also 2011. So we had or 2006 and 2011. We had 5 years in between, and there was really no difference between the levels of PCBs and mercury and carp, which is a bottom-dwelling organism that would have the most exposure, and then also we looked at largemouth bass, a common fish that people catch for just sport fishing, and there was no difference between contaminant levels in those two lakes. So we have a lake that has no industrial pollution versus White Lake, and there wasn't any difference in the fish. Now, I still have to caution people on consumption of fish. Every time somebody gets a license, there's a very lengthy description about if you're female or if you're male, you're supposed to have, and you're a certain age, you're supposed to eat so many different meals or limit your exposure to certain types of fish. But whatever White Lake is classified as, it's a drowned river mouth lake, so it has connections with Lake Michigan, and it's also an inland lake, so there are advisories for mercury and for PCBs as far as the consumption, but it's no different than what you'd have in Pentwater Lake, which has no industrial legacy.
So lakes that have an outlet to Lake Michigan all have an advisory relating to PCBs?
Correct, and all inland lakes, White Lake has characteristics of both an inland lake and a connected lake, so it has a PCB advisory and a mercury advisory like any other lake would.
So because all inland lakes in Michigan have an advisory on mercury, White Lake is included under that advisory?
Correct.
Okay. Do we know if people are drinking polluted water or not from the industrial era? I mean, I know you've kind of answered that, but we do occasionally get that question, should I be, if I'm on a private well, or I drink groundwater that we get from the city, Should I be concerned about that affecting my health or, being contaminated?
As far as the groundwater wells, when somebody goes to apply for a permit to drill a new or replacement drinking water well, we go through an assessment process at the health department. So they will have, when they get the permit back, we will go through the process of checking for contamination, oil and gas well contamination, a variety of different things, whether it be a landfill that may have been close by an industrial site. So we try to go through and make sure that that's taken care of. We also look at the water quality from the neighboring well. So if they have a nitrate issue, something like that, we can pull that up. And the other thing is, if they're already on municipal water supply, because of contamination, we suggest that they stay on that water supply. And we also strongly recommend that if they're thinking about putting an irrigation well in, that they may just stay with the municipal water supply and just use irrigation from the municipal supply if they've got groundwater contamination in the area, so they don't pull that up into the well and possibly contaminate not only the aquifer that they've drilled the irrigation well, but maybe another aquifer or the ground surface if they're pulling contamination up.
So anybody who puts in a new well has to undergo the testing you're talking about.
Right. We'll go through, like I said, we'll go through an assessment first when they apply for the permit, and if we determine that they're in an area where there's contamination to groundwater, then we'll just deny the permit and they won't be able to put in a well.
Okay, so areas that might be too close to contaminated sites where they might draw in the contamination wouldn't be able to be used.
Correct.
And then, do you want to address municipal water supplies?
The municipal water supply through the state of Michigan, through the Department of Environmental Quality, has to go through regular testing, and they set it up on intervals depending on what the possible contamination sources would be in the area. I know they regularly go through a partial chemistry test. They have to do a bacteria test every so often. And then if there's anything else, heavy metals, any other type of contamination in the area, they'll set them up on a regular schedule to have those tested. And then the municipal water supplies in the area, whether it be Whitehall or Montague, sends out an annual water quality report to the people that are on the supply so they can see what the water quality is for the municipal supply.
So that's publicly available information?
Yes.
Okay. Rick, did you want to add to that?
Just that I know that Whitehall has a aquifer protection program, and I think they actually moved one of their wells just because it was thought to be too close. It wasn't contaminated, but there's actually a program in place to regulate what's being done on the adjacent land, so somebody can't come in and cause chemical contamination that would get into the water. So in addition to the testing that Adam talked about, there's a regular protection plan that's in place, so it won't get contaminated in the future.
I have another question. Do you think people's health may have been affected when the companies were operating, from either air discharges or maybe in certain areas contaminated groundwater? It's kind of a hypothetical.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I know there's been anecdotal evidence about clusters of lupus in the area. I've read some reports about that, but it's possible. They certainly were not careful with air emissions and water emissions, but I don't think anything's ever been proven as an effect.
Adam, do you want to add anything to that?
No, my thoughts on it are pretty much the same as Rick's. It's something that's a possibility, but it has been proven without a doubt that certain companies have led to certain air quality issues which have caused certain diseases in people.
Well, and I know that there are cases like that, and I guess my question is that, there seems to be evidence that there probably were likely exposures with the air emissions and maybe in certain neighborhoods with the contaminated groundwater, but without looking at it, at that time and knowing, the circumstances, maybe determining that now, may not be possible.
It would be very difficult. I think, one of the indicators is to go back and look at the workers. I mean, the workers would have had the greatest exposure. And I know there's been follow-up studies, and I don't think they've noticed anything. I mean, we have one chemical plant in the Muskegon area that definitely had a worker issue, but nothing that's been reported about the tannery or DuPont or Hooker Occidental.
When I know we had one short-term study of a company, then it didn't go any further. But why would it show up in workers? Is it because they're exposed to more pollution?
Right, they're exposed to the actual chemicals when they're producing them, when they're bagging them, or whatever. And like I said, there was Beaufort Lakeway actually had worker cancer. There was definitely bladder cancer, more bladder cancers. But in all the follow-up studies that have been done here, and I know DuPont and Occidental do that kind of a study, and they've never saw an increase in the populations that were the workers here.
One final question, unless either one of you have something to add. Can you just provide your viewpoint on the health of White Lake? And in particular, compared to maybe 20 or 25 years ago, what's the health of the lake? Is it, something that you would allow your grandchildren to swim in, or, is it something that you consider safe, or are there still concerns?
Well, I would encourage everybody to enjoy the lake. It's a beautiful lake for boating and sailing and fishing. It's just by its natural habitat being a drowned river mouth lake. You've got fish from Lake Michigan that come in. You've got native fish that are present in the lake. You've got the wetlands. I don't see any issues. I think all the work that we've done with looking at the fish contaminants and eutrophication, the benthic invertebrates, White Lake is comparable to other lakes, even lakes that do not have the industrial legacy. So, if you were to compare it to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the lake was terrible. The fish had fish taint advisories against consumption. They tasted bad. There was dead zones where you didn't find any invertebrates. So the lake has changed dramatically because of all the restoration and cleanup efforts that have been done.
Do you want to?
I'll agree with Rick again with the amount of cleanup and restoration that's been done over the years. I think there's been a big change in the lake, and I think the people around here are seeing it. I know just from working in the area, and more in the past 5 years, I've noticed more and more people out in the summer using it recreationally. I mean, myself, I use it. I bring my family up here because it's a nice place, and I don't have an issue with it. I mean, I'm a protective parent, and I wouldn't let my kids touch or swim in the lake if I thought it was polluted or contaminated. And I don't have an issue with the kids going to the beach and swimming, and I swim in it myself. So as far as that use, I don't see any problems with it. I don't see it in the future for myself. So.
Yeah, one thing to also remember is that I've mentioned it's a drowned river mouth lake, so White Lake is continuously flushed out every 60 days. About White Lake gets flushed out with water. So any legacy activities have been long flushed out into Lake Michigan.
And does the lake meet standards for swimming and for recreation and things like that?
Right, most definitely. There's bacteria monitoring every year by the health department, and then in addition to our fish monitoring, the state monitors the fish too. So there's been really no indication that there's a problem with water contact.
Well, and then maybe just one final. Do you have anything else to add?
Well, I would just commend all the people in the White Lake area for working so diligently and cleaning up the lake. It's certainly changed a lot. I actually did some work in the mid-'70s for my master's thesis here, so it's changed a lot from the historic contamination, and they're focusing on habitat now, and the lake will continue to improve.
Adam, anything?
Just over the past couple of years, since working with the Public Advisory Council, I've learned so much about the area and the contamination that was here in the historical industrial sites and everything that went on here, and the hard work that the people that are doing in the community here. I mean, just volunteering and just gathering information, everything that's available over at the library for people to view and to research is just amazing to me, that a community would just kind of gather those kind of resources and be able to put that out public. It's very impressive. So that's the biggest thing for me.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.